Next on The Professional Rule Breaker.
I'm Kelli, and I'm a lawyer for business owners. I have a law firm, Kelli Jones Law, and I love listening to the Professional Rule Breaker podcast because I feel like I am a rule breaker in business. And if you are too, you would probably like listening. And you're going to learn about the 3 major legal topics that every business owner should know about. That way they can save time, money, and stress so you don't have to deal with legal nightmares later on in your business.
So welcome back to the Professional Rule Breaker Show. I'm your host, Kathy Walterhouse, and I am so thrilled that you joined us today because we are going to be talking about something that is so important for every single entrepreneur and small business owner, actually all business owners in general. So I am so thrilled to have my next guest. She is a lawyer for entrepreneurs and small business owners, and she counsels them on legally protecting their business, mainly through federal trademark registration and contracts. Her goal is to make the legal side a little less boring and to encourage proactive legal protection to save time, money, and stress. So I want to welcome my guest, Kelli Jones.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. I was going to say, I also should have said a little less scary too.
Definitely.
So I know you're really big in helping people try to save time, money, the stress of when something bad happens because they're not protected. I think I saw something about contracts and rebranding if you don't have a trademark. So tell me about what you see are like the biggest issues if you don't have I guess your house in order.
Yes. So I think 2 of the biggest issues really are not having contracts or not having good contracts, and then also not having your trademark for whatever part of your brand is most important to you. And both of those things can maybe be a bit of a different level of priority depending on what type of business you have. So really the risk of not having them can really also depend on what kind of business you have.
Okay. So let's start off talking about trademarks. So should we all have trademarks? Should we not? I mean, is it dependent on the type of business you have? Tell me
Yeah.
what you think.
So it's not really dependent on the type of business you have. It's more so dependent on what you have in your brand. So typically, a trademark is basically something that is used to identify your brand in connection with your goods and services. So it can be your business name, it can be a logo, a tagline, a course name, a podcast name, basically anything that you use to identify something. So when it comes to that, usually I ask people 3 questions to kind of determine like, are you ready for a trademark? Because some people might answer yes to these 3 questions before they even launch, and some people might not answer yes to them until maybe they're in year 3 or 5 in business. So my first question is, do you have anything in your brand that you want to keep at least for the foreseeable future? So again, business name, logo, tagline, anything like that. Some people, they're like, I'm not really sure about the name. Like I might change it in a year, or it's temporary. Or maybe it's my own name and I don't know. I want to find something else. Okay, so that's the first thing. Do you want to keep it? Because we don't want to go through this whole process if it's something that you want to change in a year. Then second, would you be upset if someone else popped up with the same or similar name as you? And you kind of should be upset if that happens because the whole point of a trademark is to prevent people from being confused between your brand and someone else's brand. So you want your brand to stand out. So if copycats are popping up with similar names, maybe not even identical names, but something similar, people can be confused. Or if someone goes to refer you and the other person types in Google and 2 very similar things pop up, they might choose the wrong one. We don't want that happening. So you kind of should be upset by that. And then 3, would you be upset if you were forced to rebrand? And this could happen if someone else got there first, they filed the trademark before you, and then you weren't able to get the trademark because when you go to file, you get denied because they're already there. Or they have been using the name, they send you a cease and desist asking you to rebrand. So if you don't want to be forced into that position, you want to be the first one to file that trademark. That way you own your brand and you're not waiting around for someone else to maybe get there first and force you into rebranding. So if you answer yes to those three questions, you have something you want to keep, you'd be upset if copycats popped up, and you would be upset if you were forced to fully rebrand, then it's time to start thinking about a trademark for your brand.
Okay. Okay. So trademarking your brand or a podcast or whatever it might be, how does it take? I mean, I've heard things about 6 months or 8 months or a long time to
Yeah.
do and
So
expensive too.
yes. So right now, the average time that it takes in the US is 15 months. And this is basically
Wow. So six
because,
months, I was saying 6 months, that's a short time.
yeah, pre-2020, it might have taken 6 months. Since 2020, they've just gotten slower and slower. So the
Mm,
first 9 months of that, once you file, it's just waiting in line to even be looked at. Nothing even happens at that point. So it really is kind of taking a while just because federal government, very slow, getting even slower and slower. So it
boy.
does take quite a while. And then as far as costs, usually I tell people that if they are hiring a lawyer, which obviously is the best way to go, it will take a couple thousand. And then that also depends, one, on who's charging the legal fees, and then also the filing fees for trademarks. They're 250 to 350 per class of goods or services. Basically, all goods, services, everything is split between 45 classes. So if you have a podcast, that's one filing fee. If you have, let's say you're selling shirts, that's another filing fee. Stickers,
Mhm.
that's another one. So that's also where the fees can kind of maybe add up. So really dependent on what you're selling as well. So yes, takes a while and can be costly, but
Wow.
is far less costly than the alternative of either rebranding, or if someone else got there first and maybe you were using it first, but they filed first, you could potentially try to fight for your brand. But typically the average cost of that is about 95,000. So for most of us, rebranding tends to be cheaper, which is still not cheap.
Right.
Um,
It's not cheap and it's not a fun
yeah,
thing. Plus, there's a hidden, I would say, a hidden cost, right? Because if people know you as by a certain name, and then all of a sudden you got to be a different name, that's got to be tough.
right. You have to build up that brand recognition again. So yeah, that's why, yes, you might have to budget a couple thousand for it, but it's also better than the alternative.
Right. Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I recently talked to somebody actually about this, and their response was, well, if you own the domain name, chances you really almost don't need to be trademarked. And I was like, that doesn't really sound quite right. So, what do you have to say about that? Hey there, my sole purpose of being here and starting this community is to help you learn how to sell so you can have greater income and impact. And it's not about being slimy or sleazy or having that ick feeling when you are trying to help someone. It's all about being able to learn how to sell like you would like to be sold to. And I remember a time when I first started that I was terrified and I hated it. And so, what you'll find in this community is all sorts of resources to help you basically break past barriers and get to the next level. So, go ahead and join now if you want to learn from somebody that's done it. By the way, I don't know if you know this, but I've sold close to $1 billion. So, yes, a billion with a B. So, if you want to learn from somebody who's been there and done it and can show you how to sell in a way that just makes you feel good, go ahead and join us in this free school community. And looking forward to getting to know you.
Yeah, so I do hear people say that a lot. Oh, they have the domain name or they have the LLC or the Instagram handle, and those things are great to have, but it doesn't give you ownership over the name. So someone else can still get the trademark for that. And then you might run into problems with that if they have the federal trademark, because then that is what gives them ownership over that brand name. The other things, the LLC, the Instagram handles, the domain name, those don't give you ownership. So you're still at risk with that.
Okay. Well, does that have to do with something I've read that you said about filing early can mean a big difference between like spending, I don't know, a couple $1,000 or spending, I don't know, 100,000, 200,000 or something like that?
Yeah, so that's really where it comes in, because you always want to be the first to file, because technically the law in the US is the first person to use it has rights to it. But when you're not the first to file, in order for you to prove, oh, I was the first one to use it, you have to take them to court. And that's where it can get really that 95,000 average cost. And also, you're trying to say, I was the first one to use it. And what typically happens in that scenario is you get landlocked to a geographical area that you were the first to use it in. So, for example, the Burger King franchise that we see today, they're not the original Burger King. The original Burger King only, they did not have a federal trademark. They operate in Illinois. Then the Burger King that we see today popped up everywhere. The little original Burger King was like, hey, we are operating here. We use this name first. You can't use this. The big Burger King had the federal trademark. So they went to court, and the original Burger King is allowed to still operate because they were using the name first, but they're only allowed to operate in a 20-mile area in
Oh,
Mattoon,
wow.
Illinois.
So they
So
can't really expand.
they cannot. So the lesson there is you have to not just be the first to use it, but also the first to file, because otherwise you might get landlocked to a small geographical area. And especially with the internet and everything, like nobody wants to be stuck in that position.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a great example of why you should do that and why you should trademark. So, a couple other things I want to ask you about. LLC versus something else.
So usually people are deciding, do I want to stay a sole proprietor? Should I get an LLC? Should I form a corporation? And that really, it kind of depends on your business and your goals as well. I typically tell people that if they intend to have a business and not just a hobby, they should operate with some type of business entity, whether it's an LLC or a corporation. So not as just a sole proprietor, because the whole point of the business entity really is to protect your personal assets should anything go wrong in your business. So your personal assets, your house, your car, your bank accounts, your investment accounts, that is what is protected by having some type of entity, because that's really where it's separating you from your business. So as a
Mhm.
sole proprietor, you and your business are one. If anything happens to the business, it also affects your own bank account, all that kind of stuff. You have an entity, you're separated from that. So then if anything goes wrong in the business, maybe your bank accounts, your car, that's still okay. It's separate. So then you're really deciding, do I need an LLC or a corporation? That's really where you're looking at what your goals are for your business. How big do you want to expand? Do you want investors? If you want investors, then maybe you go the corporation route, because then you might want to give shares away or things like that. If you're going to be forming a really big company, maybe a corporation. If you're not, then maybe an LLC. It is less paperwork, less filing obligations, and less costly typically, but you're still getting that protection of separating you from your business. So that's really where it depends on what exactly you're doing. But I typically always say if you're in business for more than 6 months, you might want to start considering some type of entity just to separate you and your business.
No, I totally agree. I think that's incredibly important to make sure that that is in place. So I have a question for you because I don't know why this is, but I don't know if you can answer this or not. I have noticed that a lot of people like to incorporate in Delaware. Why is that?
Yes, so that's a good question, because I always see people saying, coming to me too, saying, oh, I live in Georgia, but should I file in Delaware or Wyoming or whatever? Because I saw a TikTok and they said to do it. That is a
I was
tough
like, don't take advice from TikTok.
Exactly. Sometimes people form in other places like Delaware or Wyoming or whatever, for it could be tax benefits. Sometimes I think Delaware, you were able to form an anonymous LLC, so you didn't have to attach your name to it, versus in their state, maybe they did, as like the person
The
of
managing member,
LLC.
the
Yeah, and the
sole, I
registration.
can't remember what it is. I don't remember what I'm listed as. I think I'm the managing member or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So sometimes that is why. But what a lot of people don't realize is that typically if you're opening an LLC in a state that you do not live in, you also need to be then getting a foreign LLC in the state you do live in and work from. So sometimes people think, oh, I'm going to save money because I'll open it in Delaware where, I'll get more something tax benefits or the costs are cheaper or whatever. But then they also have to pay the foreign LLC costs in the state that they're in. So then sometimes unless you're having a big company, the costs really might not help you at that point because then you're having to pay the costs in your state as well. And then a lot of times you're paying then double the costs, especially I live in Tennessee. Here we have to pay $300 a year for an LLC or a foreign LLC, which a foreign LLC is basically just, oh, I have an LLC formed somewhere else, but I'm
Mhm.
telling you that it's formed somewhere else. So I have to kind of like tell you here in my state too. So things like that, if I were to open there, then I'd be paying Delaware's costs and I'd be paying my $300 a year in Tennessee. So I'm not just saving money there, I'm still paying here. Some states charge yearly for an LLC, Tennessee, Massachusetts, California. Some
Florida.
states, yeah, some states like New York, where I'm from, it's $200 one-time fee, and then you only have to pay $9 every other year
Really? Wow.
yeah, I know. So I came from there and I'm like, oh, now I have to pay every year. But so yeah, a lot of times I would recommend talking to a lawyer, talking to an accountant to see, will you actually benefit from saving money by filing in Delaware or Wyoming or wherever? Or are you just increasing your costs because now you have to file a foreign LLC in your own state as well?
Wow, I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Well, my audience, I have an international audience as well too. And some of my folks that I personally know, they're from a different country. And
Mhm.
they have all set up their LLC in Delaware too. So I thought that that was kind of a unique. So that
Yeah,
was
and that might make more sense also because they're not
yeah,
having to register in California as well and pay that yearly with
right.
they're not living in California. So yeah, that might make more sense for international. But yeah, I always tell people check with an accountant also before you like make these decisions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Check with the professionals that know what they're talking about because unless you're an expert in it, you don't want to be messing with that at all.
Yeah.
So let's talk contracts. So I've seen you can get a contract for, I don't know what it is, $9 or something like that, whatever the number might be, just through some
Mhm.
random site on the internet. And my thought is probably when you get that, it doesn't really protect you. So let's talk about contracts and what's your
Yeah.
recommendation?
So I typically always recommend getting them from a lawyer. And that doesn't mean having to spend thousands having them custom draft it, but some of us also have contract templates. I have them available that save costs there. That way you can get a contract for something specific that you're looking for, an affiliate agreement or an independent contractor agreement or something like a photographer agreement, something specific. And that's usually a better way to go because it's usually I've reviewed tons of those contracts that you can get online, like on Rocket Lawyer and like wherever else. And typically they're missing things. And it's not usually what's in your contract that ends up hurting you. It's what was not in there.
Yeah.
So that's usually what happens because your contract should account for all of these what if scenarios. What could go wrong? Most people don't automatically just always think about the risk of what could go wrong. That's what we do. We're trained to think of every little scenario that could go wrong. And we put all of those what ifs in there because the first sign of an issue, you want to be able to go to your contract and say, okay, well, I'm having this issue. They're not paying, or they're late on their payment, or they didn't do something that they were supposed to do by this deadline. I always say, well, what does your contract say? And a lot of times the contract doesn't specify. And then that's where there's problems. Use your contract to really, you're managing expectations for the person you're working with. You're setting your boundaries. You're hoping that it prevents miscommunication. So really your contract is all about communication, and you want it to be really effective in that contract. That way, any problems you have can be, it's not going to mean you're never going to have a problem, but it's hopefully going to mean whatever happens is going to be less bad because it was accounted for in your contract. So that's why I always say, if you can, go to a lawyer. If you don't have a good contract now, either get a contract or a template from a lawyer, or maybe have a lawyer review your contract to see, oh, can we make it better? Because that is really like your first line of defense as a business owner.
Okay. How often should a contract or maybe your terms and conditions or whatever you have, how often should you review them?
I typically recommend people to review them. I mean, at least once a year, have it on your list. Also, because things might change in your business, maybe a policy change, or a lot of times when I review my own contracts, like my own with my trademark clients, it's usually, oh, I had some little type of communication issue, and now I'm going into my contract and making sure things are even a little bit tighter, or accounting for maybe a rush fee because my client ignored me for 6 months and now they're coming back and our deadline's tomorrow. And I'm like, oh my God, now I'm traveling and I have to find a computer and make sure I have
Right.
internet and do this. So little things, sometimes you'll update your contracts based on what happens with the people you're working with. But I would say at least on a yearly basis, if not maybe quarterly, if you can, just to tighten things up and make sure. Sometimes maybe you'll think, oh, I wish that went more smoothly. Oh, or I wish something, or maybe someone was surprised by something. And you're like, oh, maybe I can make that more clear in the contract. Like certain things, I'll have a little initial next to it. That way, just things that I really want them to highlight, because if you're not a lawyer, a lot of people don't read all their contracts.
Yeah.
So certain things I want to really make sure they are aware of so they're not surprised by this later on. So maybe add a little line for them to initial that section just to make it even more clear, draw their attention to it. So things like that are reasons why you want to do it at least yearly.
Okay. Okay. In this day and age, so much is done electronically. I remember I'm old, and I would do a lot of highly customized face to face, even with the CEO of a publicly traded company or whatever it is. And you would sit with them and sit with the attorneys and go through all the pages, initials, sign at always even just signing randomly at the bottom as well, and just going through that. But in this day and age, everything's kind of changed. So do you recommend doing it through DocuSign, doing it through, I mean, do you have any recommendations when it comes to that?
There's tons of platforms out there. I typically recommend any of them that take both signatures, account for it. Like usually they like take your IP address or like something like that. So any of those, really, there's tons of them out there. There's the Adobe Sign, DocuSign, platforms like Dubsado and Honeybook have them attached as well. So really any of that, as long as it is something that is made for that. You're not just sending it like via email and having them like sign. Because then at least if you're using a platform like that, at least it has a record of both of you
Right.
signing.
If you happen to lose the contract or whatever happens, you have an electronic copy. And I know sometimes it's hard, especially if you have a very complicated business. There could be a lot of pages attached to it. So I think that's when it really gets complicated. I mean, I even just think of some of my contracts that were, I would say, in the hundreds of pages long. So in certain the really, really complex ones. So just even thinking about doing that electronically, I think it would have
Yeah.
been a lot easier. But that's a good thing to do, I would say. So what have you seen with your clients or like clients coming to you of a situation where something has like really just blown up that could have been averted?
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely see that a lot with contracts, and pretty much every single time it was because their contract was missing something.
Mm,
And it could have been not happened at all, or at least handled a lot better, or maybe cost less money if they had a better contract from the start. Because typically, like when you're having an issue and it's not accounted for in the contract, there's only so much we can do. a lot of times it's like we try to mitigate it as best as we can, but a lot of times it ends up being like a lesson learned for next time. So usually it's what was missing in your contract. Like I've had people where they didn't have, maybe people kind of disappeared on a project, like for a web design client. They paid and then they're supposed to get this web designed, and the web designer keeps going back trying to get more information from them. And then they're maybe sporadically answering or not. But then the web designer is also having new clients along. And then all of a sudden they come back and they're like, okay, I want my website now. And they're like, the web designer is really busy. I don't have time for that. This was 6 months ago. So having something in the contract to, okay, the client disappeared. Now you're gonna have to pay a reopening fee because you missed all these deadlines, but no deadlines were in the contract. No reopening fee was in there. So now she's kind of deciding, because you never really know also what someone else will do. Will they sue? Can you be able to negotiate some type of like agreement on this? Okay, fine, I will do this, but you have to give me a few months for it because you disappeared. So having all of those things accounted for will definitely save you a lot of stress and probably
Yes.
time and money as well if
Yeah.
it's in the contract in the beginning.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But I think hopefully you have such a good relationship with the customer that you can renegotiate and maybe do an addendum or something
Yes.
like that, especially if
And I,
something's out of scope or whatever it is.
yes.
Um,
And I always tell people like it's easier to escalate as needed than de-escalate. So, because a lot of times, especially small business owners, our emotions are involved. So try to like, if there is a situation, step back and think about it first before just responding with emotion, because a lot of times we can negotiate some type of way to fix this
mhm.
rather than going right to court or going right to lawyers.
Nobody
Like,
wins at that point.
exactly. And then you're just out sometimes even more money because you have to do all this stuff. And then, oh, you try to talk first. Okay, if you need to escalate to a lawyer to court, sure. But if you go right in with, I'm sending my lawyer to you, you can't really de-escalate from that. It's hard because then they're on guard. They're like, oh my God, now I need a lawyer. This is
Mhm.
contentious. So try to start with just communicating with people first. And most times you can reach a resolution that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because that way it is a win-win for both parties rather than a win-lose. And in business, you always want to make it a win-win 100% of the time if you can.
And
So are we?
sometimes, right. And sometimes you just have to kind of also look at what cost was even involved, what time. Is it easier to just like bless and release and let it go than pursuing something that might now just take more of your time, more of your money, more of your energy that you're putting out into this?
Oh, I love this. I'm so glad we had you on the show because I think this is such an important topic. So, Kelli, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at lawyer Kelli with an I underscore. You can also find my website, kellyjoneslaw.com, Kelly with an I. And you can find all my everything else from there pretty much, and email and all of that to contact me as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, I do have to ask you this. So, what makes you a rule breaker? Because I have a feeling you're a rule breaker.
I think I've just always kind of approached business a little bit differently. First, I never thought I would even have a business. I swore that I would never open my own law firm. And then COVID kind of happened, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to do either I could get another job in a stuffy law firm that I'd probably also hate and just do it until retirement, or I could open my own firm and do things kind of my own way. And that's what I did. I practice virtually. I don't really wear suits. I don't use legal jargon all the time. I try to like do things
You're a
off.
real human.
Yes. And people say that too, because I hear from a lot of people that they feel like a lawyer talked down to them or only used like complex language that they didn't understand. They made the legal more scary, they were more overwhelmed than before. So I feel like my goal is to kind of be the opposite of that and to break away from like the traditional law firms
Mhm.
to be more like modernized. So I think that's my biggest thing.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And don't worry, you're in the audience of the community of rule breakers. That's who listens to this show. People who kind of think outside the box and go to the beat of their own drum is what this community is all about. So I'm so happy we had you on the show because, like I said, such an important topic. And so we're going to make sure we have all your information on the show notes. So please, if you don't have your house in order, please reach out to Kelli and see what she can do to help you out. Because what you're doing out there is important. And the last thing you want to do is have something blow up in your face or have to rebrand or whatever it is. So again, thank you so much, Kelli, for all of your information. And I know everybody out there is probably took a ton of notes as well.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. It was really a lot of fun. All right. Thanks again.